Hi, everyone. Hoping that you all are well. Thank you for joining us for this discussion related to the Hebrew Israelites. It has been noted that even though the Hebrew Israelite narrative is supposed to be founded upon Scripture, there are a number of other dynamics that serve as the foundation. A few things to note with respect to the Americas is that part of the Hebrew Israelite narrative involves the American Indian identity appropriation. This takes place with the Hebrew Israelites identifying the American Indians as the tribe of Gad and the tribe of Reuben. There's also a dynamic wherein there is a male god complex. In other words, the males in this narrative are encouraged to take on sort of a god complex. So they see themselves as God. There is also a very interesting colorism dynamic going on with respect to the Hebrew Israelites. And then there is this very public, we can put it in quotation marks, black misogyny. In other words, not just the individuals are identified as black in some instances, but the misogyny is specifically directed towards females who have been identified as black. And with respect to the Americas, these females who are identified as black often have indigenous roots. And so there is this specific focus on a particular collective of females that serve as the target for this particular brand of misogyny. There are also some factors that suggest that the Hebrew Israelite narrative might be a psychological operation, complete with this entity that appears to be a fake prophet or a false prophet. Now, part of the reason why many of the aspects of the narrative appear to be a psychological operation is because you have this dynamic wherein there are exaggerations made about these things like gender wars. There is a constant, incessant, obsessive focus on females, on women, and patriarchy, and also domination that goes along with this God complex situation here. Now, with respect to this prophet that brought about this narrative appears to be an individual who's named William Saunders Crowdy. This individual was supposed to be active in this movement after receiving this revelation from 1896 until 1908. And here are a couple of other interesting depictions of this entity known as William S. Crowdy. Notably, there are some aspects of this individual that are reminiscent of Marcus Garvey. And then there are these Crowdy disciples that appear to have different sects or different branches with respect to the narrative. And so you have different collectives with slightly different paradigms based upon geographic location. And here we see this prophet, William S. Crowdy. Again, this individual was understood as a leader and a prophet related to this Church of God and Saints of Christ. Now, although the narrative situates the individuals in the Old Testament, there are some that have a messianic tradition that ties them to the New Testament. According to this source, William Saunders Crowdy was born in St. Mary's County, Maryland in 1847. At the age of 16, he joined the United States Army and served in the Civil War from 1863 until 1865. He then became a quartermaster sergeant in the 5th Cavalry in 1867, and he was discharged in 1872. He was in Oklahoma in 1892 when he had a vision and his ministry or his prophecy started. Now, according to the narrative, he was sent to redeem Israel. The problem with this is when someone starts to talk about this redemption identity, they are situating themselves in the role of a Messiah or a Christ or an anointed one. The narrative goes on to indicate that he made these massive accomplishments in just 12 short years, and it's identified here as incredible. It also offers that he was a businessman, an industrialist, a musician, a grand master of masons, an author, and a publisher. Now, this text entitled Chosen People, The Rise of American Black Israelite Religions is very interesting, and it's very helpful in terms of looking at the pathway of this Hebrew Israelite narrative. Now, this book looks into the rise of the Black Hebrew Israelite religions in America, also touching on Judaism, Islam, and Rastafarianism. What's also noteworthy is that there is a tie between the Hebrew Israelite narrative and what's known as the Holiness Christianity movement of the 1890s and the emergence of the Pentecostal movement in 1906. There's also an observation that there was a wave of these Black Israelite synagogues arising with the Great Migration of African Americans and West Indians to northern cities. There's also a connection here between this movement and, again, Marcus Garvey's Black nationalist movement. Now, in addition to addressing the migration of a number of Americans to Ethiopia in the 1900s, this text also examines the Methodist, Masonic, and Anglo-Israelite discourse related to this entire dynamic. And so there's also this focus on the theory of theology of liberation or liberation theology. And interestingly, it's related to Britain's marginalized poor. It is noted also that in terms of phenotype, Crowdy does appear to have some phenotype dynamics that are Habsburg in nature, and also some dynamics that appear as Irish. And here we see more about this Masonic connection related to the Hebrew Israelites, and it indicates though Bishops Crowdy and his contemporary William Christian were both dedicated Freemasons who brought much of their fraternal order into their Black Israelite churches, there's no smoking gun linking Black Jews like Crowdy or Christian to the Israelite discourse that circulated widely in Freemasonry and Anglo-Israelism. However, it indicates there is much circumstantial evidence suggesting that Crowdy and Christian had access to Masonic legends of the ancient Israelites. Now, if someone is presented as a major businessman, an industrialist, an author, a pastor, a prophet, all of this during this very interesting time, you would think that there would be significant information on this individual with respect to birth records, marriage records, census records, military records, particularly given this narrative about this rise in the military. You would expect to be seeing those things. However, there is a significant dearth of information on this individual. So when looking at this name specifically, William Saunders Crowdy, we find basically nothing. Okay. There are many pictures that are offered, and then you see these things that are offered by public members, but you do not see actual census records, and there are no military records that have been provided that are usually very easy to find. Then, with taking the Saunders out of the search, just looking for William Crowdy, there is still a dearth of information. And so when you see this census and voter list, it's not this individual. And also, when looking at the immigration and emigration records, we also do not find this particular individual. We basically find no real records in terms of census records or military records or immigration records. But of course, the person was supposedly born in Maryland, and so we wouldn't necessarily expect to see significant immigration records. And so this is what we have here. We have a few individuals who are identified as William Saunders Crowdy, and we see this grave information and of course this public picture. And it indicates here that this individual, again, was born in Maryland, so we do have that. And then we have this date of death as 1908 again. However, we don't have actual records that are provided to support this. And here again, we see multiple photographs of this individual without any records. Now, what is noted is a realty record. It looks like something that was in a newspaper. It's indicating that an individual named William S. Crowdy and wife had a real estate transaction related to this Church of God and Saints of Christ. It relates to 40 acres of land near Belleville. It indicates the price. However, that's about all we have with respect to this. What's also interesting is the names that the individual has. So we have this William Saunders Crowdy, and consistent with that phenotype, we have this Saunders name being rooted in Ireland with this interesting motto of conscious of no wrong. And so with respect to this Saunders name, it has an interesting transliteration, which is related to the name Alexander. And then, of course, there is the surname Crowdy that has an interesting narrative. And so it indicates that the Crowdy family name dates back to the ancient Anglo-Saxon culture of Britain. The name comes from when an early member worked as a person who played a crowd, a stringed instrument similar to a fiddle or a six-string violin. And so, in other words, this name is associated with someone who knew how to work a crowd. Very interesting. Additionally, this name is associated with Scotland and Wales. Now, what stands out when looking at these various spellings or transliterations of Crowdy is that it's related to that name Crowther. And if you recall, there is a Samuel Crowther who is another religious figure associated with Nigeria. And so there are many reasons to call into question this Hebrew Israelite narrative, particularly as it relates to American Indians. And so individuals who are American Indians are cautioned about identifying with this narrative that has been superimposed onto American Indians in the late 1800s. And so this is not a narrative that American Indians had prior to this Crowdy individual. And so it's also very important with respect to females who are considered American Indian to be conscious of their relationships with entities that identify as Hebrew Israelite. The dynamics and the narratives and the paradigms that accompany the Hebrew Israelite narrative are unhealthy for females in general, and very specifically for entities that would be identified as American Indian. And there's another notation. The dynamics that are presented are also unhealthy for the males. And so it's an unhealthy dynamic all the way around, including the obsessive focus on females. Now, with respect to this Hebrew Israelite narrative, it does appear as a psychological operation, but remember that a psychological operation is not always necessarily something that is a formal process. And so individuals can actually create psychological operations. And that appears to be a distinct possibility with respect to this situation, this William S. Crowdy, and the rest of the narrative that goes along with William S. Crowdy.